We are live for our final session of the day, and I'm joined by Kevin Formby, who's Vice President of Capital Markets and Finance at Keysight Technologies. And very pleased to have Kevin here. Keysight is one of the sponsors of our event today, and it's a New York Stock Exchange listed company, which last year acquired Eggplant, which is was owned by Carlyle Group, a private equity firm, but was essentially based in the UK. And Eggplant, as you know, is a test automation specialist. Kevin, we've got a lot of ground to cover. We're going to talk about some of the macro trends in your marketplace for testing services. We're going to talk about the challenges that in particular smaller financial firms, US regional banks, for example, and local banks face in making this leap to DevOps and to automation technologies. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity. We're going to be talking about the issue of how firms respond to increasing regulatory scrutiny of software development. But first of all, can you start by telling us a little bit about your career, how you've come to your role at Keysight, and then we'll talk a little bit about the acquisition of Eggplant and why that made sense.
Yeah, Matthew, yeah, thanks for the intro. I hope things are going okay in the UK there. I don't know if it's nice and warm there or raining as usual.
It's improving.
Yeah, I'm actually dialing in here from Austin, Texas. So we're having a bit of a cold snap today. I think it's going to be about 25 Celsius. I think yesterday was 28.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I think we can move on. Thanks.
Yeah. So a little bit of background, as you can probably tell, you know, from my accent, I'm not from Texas, originally from the UK. Been working at Keysight now for about 5 years, and I think I just said, you know, who the hell is Keysight? I think some people have heard of them, but you know, they may have read, oh, Keysight acquiring Eggplant. You know, who were Keysight and what are they doing here? People haven't heard of Keysight, but I bet they've heard of the two people that founded the company. It was originally called Hewlett-Packard. It was Bill Hewlett and David Packard set the company up in 1938. And Hewlett-Packard got bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually got into PCs and printers. And at that particular point, it split into two, and it became Agilent and HP. And then Agilent in 2014 split up and became Keysight Technologies and Agilent. And Keysight is the original test and measurement business of HP, of Hewlett-Packard. So we've got a history going back to the garage in Palo Alto with two guys working away there, and really the beginning of Silicon Valley and modern testing and QA. So we've got a very strong heritage. Fairly big company, 14,000 employees around the world, $4.5 billion. So it's a very big company. My background is, you know, Lec Eng from Birmingham University in the UK. I used to work for defense industry. I used to be a weapons systems engineer, so I know all about shooting down aircraft and making big explosions and causing general chaos, which is perhaps good background to financial services and QA, because if you get things wrong, you can cause a lot of chaos. I've done all sorts of things, been the CEO of a small company doing test and measurement equipment, but I'm now responsible in Keysight for our entire strategy to do with financial services. So it's a very important sector for us. We've been doing some acquisitions in the space, we're growing it, and we've got some big plans. So that's kind of my background and what Keysight's about. Do you want to know a little bit about the acquisition? Or?
Well, I do. I know that I think it's been published that Keysight spent about $330 million on Eggplant. But I'd be very interested to know how Eggplant fits into that broader portfolio of testing services.
Yeah, a very good question. Because yeah, 330 million is not loose change in the pocket, even for a company the size of Keysight. About 9 times revenues. So you can see that we obviously think Eggplant is going to grow. And there was really half a dozen reasons why we acquired them. They were a market leader in software and QA. We're very much into buying companies that are market leaders. So that was one reason. They're very strong in using artificial intelligence to do QA. And we see that as a growth area, actually beyond just QA as well, into other areas. So we're trying to build up expertise on AI. They're strong in finance as well. That's a key sector for us to grow our business, so that was good. Strong in end user experience, testing of that. We see that's a very important thing going forward. And also kind of similar veins, very strong in mobile app testing. I mean, the thing at the moment, we think less than 20% of the world's financial transactions are done through mobile apps. So that's 80% aren't. So there's a tremendous market there to grow into that area. And those companies, need to spend money on the QA testing of those applications. The final reason that we built them is actually the most important. Keysight is really expert at testing network infrastructure, right? Yep. We sell a lot of equipment to people like Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto, some of the large banks that have been on the conference today and large purchases of our equipment to test their infrastructure. So we're very good at testing infrastructure, and then once it's deployed, measuring what's going on. But kind of the missing third leg of the stool is application testing. Mm-hmm. And we think that if we can combine network testing, kind of pre-deployment, ongoing testing, we have competitors in those areas, and Eggplant has competitors in the Eggplant area, but no one can do all three. And what we want to become is the single vendor solution provider for people who want to have highly reliable applications and infrastructure in the financial services space. So Eggplant's the third leg of that overall strategy. So it's very important to us.
Understood. So I'd like to ask you about a couple of things you mentioned. First, Eggplant and Eggplant's expertise in AI as it's applied to automated testing. What would you say is the state of the art in terms of artificial intelligence in software development? What expectations do you think that financial firms, for example, US banks, regional banks, should have of their investments in AI? How much store should they be setting in AI?
Okay, I think AI, you can think about it working on two different levels. And the first level is where it's historically been, which is, can we get away from scripting, 10,000 different use cases? Can we use AI to simplify things? So rather than focus on 1,000 2,000 use cases, let's just look at the 500 use cases that are relevant or important to our customers, because no one is ever going to go through a particular use case and it's some obscure corner case. Yes, the software might go wrong there, but no one's ever going to do that user journey. So I think that's where AI has come from. I think where it's going to, it's a lot more sophisticated. How can you integrate the AI feedback into your DevOps environment or even your DevSecOps environment? What can it really tell me about things that gives me competitive advantage? And give that in a way that isn't people looking at a computer screen to derive it. In the ongoing testing of a particular product, we've noticed that users, when they get to screen 4, they seem to spend 3 minutes trying to understand what's going on. Right? Shouldn't we be improving that particular screen so people think it's really quick, and coming up as a suggestion to the development team to do it, rather than people kind of crawling through reports and things. So I would say, how does AI go beyond just making QA testing more efficient to giving competitive advantage? I think that's really the state of the art And that's what people like Eggplant are trying to develop and work with customers to deliver.
We've heard, thank you. We've heard from a couple of very large firms today at this event, JP Morgan and Citi, about this challenge of achieving simplicity at scale. That the largest firms have to set standards and processes across the enterprise. That's a challenge with so many legacy systems. But equally, the promise of these new technologies is to enable smaller financial firms, regional banks, local banks, to make that digital leap, to make the leap to DevOps, to accelerated continuous app delivery, to compete on a, if you like, an even technology playing field with even the largest firm.
Yeah.
Is that another reason? I mean, is that where you see growth for this?
Yeah, I think you can divide the market actually into three different groups here. One is the really big banks. I mean, you've had some of them on the call today, you know, the likes of JP Morgan and Citibank. They are enormous. I think JP Morgan has something like $3 trillion of assets, right? I don't know how many people they have writing the software, but I assume it's measured in thousands of people, right? And they've got one set of challenges. You know, they must have multiple different applications. They've got lots of legacy systems they interface with, right? They've got one set of challenges. But then there's two other different groups of people. I'll go right to the far extreme at the moment. I call it online banking or digital banks, or I don't know the phrase that is used in the industry, challenger banks. You know, you've got the likes of Ally Bank, Monzo, Mint, those kinds of people, where they don't have the legacy systems. They don't have all of these ancient systems that you're trying to interface in. They don't have the breadth of products that they're trying to integrate together. And I think they have a different set of issues. They're very much, how fast can we move? How good can we make it? Yep. Right, for their little thing. Then in the middle, there's another group, which is the smaller traditional banks, which probably have a mixture of both. I was just looking actually for an example before the call, and I'm in Austin, Texas. So I looked, there's a bank here called Austin Bank.
Yes.
Set up in 1907. Yep. It's run by Jeff Austin, great grandfather of the original Mr. Austin who set the bank up. They have less than 500 employees. Now, they're in some difficult position because they just can't put the resources into developing their own applications, right? So they've got to go to like the fintech providers, or more, maybe you call them systems integrators or technology providers, people like Fiserv, someone like that, yes, who can do kind of banking in the box for them.
Yeah.
Now, I think there the challenges of QA is you've got a mixture of a third party developing the product, but you've still got to integrate that product into some of the back office systems. So I think that's an interesting challenge, and they're really looking for solutions for people that can integrate the QA testing of the third party in with the interface requirements of an established bank. And I think that's quite a challenge. And it also must be done in an environment where they have to differentiate themselves. So they can't just use the same, although behind the scenes, it might be the same banking application, the bank in the box, yeah, from a banking service provider. They've got to do something different with it. Right?
Yes.
So I think that's a challenge.
Yeah. And where does Eggplant and that automation technology, where does it fit into that picture?
Yeah. I think it fits in for the larger banks. I think it fits into the classic challenges of large QA, right, environments and interfacing to many back office systems and how you automate that. I think for the middle ranking banks I was talking about, again, it can interface to not just the third party systems, but how you interface that into the banking legacy systems as well. So you have to be able to do both. And Eggplant's, kind of key intellectual property is how it builds a digital twin of the banking system, the banking process flows, and how you can test out these systems, and actually how you embed the artificial intelligence into that to actually prove that things are wrong. I've seen some very good demos actually since I've come on board and been working with the Eggplant fellows. You know, you're down to the point, we should have a particular look at the quality of some particular software module that's developed by Fred, right? Particularly when Fred's been working on the Friday night at 10 o'clock, where it doesn't seem to be the highest quality software in the world. So you can actually get to understanding that level of detail of what's going on.
So one of the points I think you're making there, Kevin, if we can sum up, is that faced with the increasing complexity of their markets and the demands of their customers, the increasing sophistication of the demands of their customers for quality of apps, for example, smaller banks can no longer simply rely on taking their systems out of a box, relying on core banking systems without really customizing them. And to customize them, they need their own off-the-shelf tools.
Yes, because they have to do the testing.
Because they
can't just rely on it being correct. Another challenge kind of linked with that is I think we've been very much focused in the discussions today on software QA, right? But software doesn't live in an isolated world. It has to rely on devices and it has to rely on networks to work. And I'm apologies to the Citibank and the JP Morgan presenters today. I'm actually a Bank of America client, BOA, and I have a BOA app on my iPhone. I have one on my iPad. I have one on my MacBook Pro. I use this. I'm currently on the Wi-Fi because I'm working upstairs. When I work downstairs in my office, right, when I'm down there, I use a wired connection.
Yes.
When I use my iPhone, I'm actually in Austin. We have 5G, so I'm using 5G here. But if I'm somewhere else on 4G, if I'm in the home, right, I'm on the Wi-Fi. I think I've got 36 different ways of accessing my Bank of America mobile banking app.
Right.
And you can't take the application in isolation. You now need to test it with the devices and also how the devices operate over a network. If I'm a Bank of America customer, I will get a different experience accessing my Bank of America app in Austin on 4G than if I go on a business trip. Hopefully I go on a business trip one day, right, to Sydney, right, where I've now got 150 milliseconds latency between the devices. So the complexity of all of that works together is becoming a big challenge. And we think that Keysight is going to be unique to answer and help customers with those kinds of challenges.
Yes, and again, we've heard today from even some of the largest firms that in terms of the way that, for example, they're assessing virtualization technologies, containerization, it's not that they've just started, but they're still on the journey up the curve. There's a good few years of investment and development here.
Yeah.
Good. Now we also wanted to talk about again, one of the big themes of the event today, which is the emergence of industry standards for software quality, partly driven by regulators, partly driven by the need for share standards, a certain level of cooperation even between financial firms, communities, and associations to benchmark software quality for the era of automation, where auditing standards have to change, and we have to find new ways of identifying what technical debt we have, where our technical risk is sitting, and our IT risk. Tell me about how Keysight is going to be working on that requirement, and what response do you think financial firms should be preparing?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think One is Keysight. We want to be involved in those sorts of initiatives. Right. This is one of the benefits of Eggplant being part of a bigger organization. We can put more resources into things like that. So like over the last 12 months, we've joined the American Bankers Association in the US to be more involved in finance. And in the UK, there's a trade organization called UK Finance, which is all about developing the financial services industry in the UK. And part of their remit is on issues like standardizations as well. I think it's going to be key. I think it's not just quality, right? I think we've heard the DevSecOps phrase used several times today.
Yes.
And I think it's how you integrate the security standards as well in all of this, and how you work with third parties. Because I think you may have seen the famous SolarWinds security breach earlier this year, which is a breach in the vendor supply chain, basically.
Yeah.
And right, we're opening kind of a can of worms here, because all of these banks are now relying on third party, like fintech companies, as we're talking about. You're now vulnerable to their security breaches as well.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example outside of finance. I got an email yesterday from my American Airlines frequent flyer account, saying there had been a security breach at CETA. They're a networking company for the airline industry. And some of my frequent flyer information has been compromised. And we're a lot more vulnerable to things like that. So I think the standards of QA, but also the security that goes along with the applications, are going to be key going forward. And I think you're going to see a lot more testing of not just standalone QA, but the standalone security hardness before you actually release the products as well. So that's an area that we've got a lot of strength in, and it's an area that we're interested in working with standards bodies and the industry in developing those standards.
Yes, and that's a really interesting area to discuss. We can't do it justice right now, but how can banks and other financial firms help each other more in this area? Do you think that they're doing the right things?
I think they could perhaps do more. I think there has been some examples in the past where banks have worked very well together on industry standards. I'll give you one example, on the trading side, is the messaging standards used FIX, which is used for a lot of buy-side, sell-side communications and even order entry and stuff. That was an initiative led, I think it was Credit Suisse, led it about 20 years ago, and it became an industry-wide standard. And I think we need similar approaches on things like software quality and software security, and application and user quality as well. So I think that's the kind of approach that is needed. You've got to be careful, though, that this doesn't become a monopolistic type of approach.
Well, they're doing it, aren't they? You can have code repositories, you can have static analysis, you can have ISO standards. Yes, you can have various standards, can't you?
Yeah, and I think we've got to be careful as well that compliance to standards don't become so complex and onerous that it becomes too expensive for the smaller players. It's one thing, the biggest investment banks in the world, with their large compliance departments complying to these things. It's different if you're a smaller player. And I think you have to make sure that any standards don't become a paper pushing exercise, but they deliver real value to everyone in kind of the ecosystem chain, everyone from the regulators, from the Bank of England, the SEC, down to the smallest Bank of Austin.
Yes. And we have seen, in for example, changes such as the open banking market created in Europe, that there's it's created tensions between retailers and the larger banks, and the larger banks and the smaller banks, because it's the larger banks that have been seen to own the standards.
Yeah.
Final question. We talked a bit about AI, and we talked about the utility of automation technologies for smaller firms, automation technologies such as Eggplants. What technology changes, aside from those, do you think that our audience should be most excited about going into, well, we're in the new year now, but going into 2022 as well? What's coming down the pike that most excites you?
I think one thing that I like, that I'm a keen advocate of, is tighter. It's not really technology, it's more a process type issue. I really like the closeness that exists between business people, product managers, business analysts, and technology development groups and QA. I think in many organizations, there's a bit too much of a gap there. And I think we have to move to a point where QA is seen not as kind of a realm of the last thing in the chain for the dev team to do before the product's released, but something that product managers can actually interact with themselves. A lot more that the business managers have got direct access to the quality metrics, both pre and post deployment of applications, so they can really see kind of from an end user perspective what's going on. And you should get to the point where you don't need to understand scripting to be able to use these tools. It's not a dev ops thing, it's a dev ops business thing.
Yes.
I think that's going to be really cool as we move more into the world where business people can see straight away kind of the quality of the products, both pre and post deployment. I think that's a key area moving forward.
Okay. A couple of minutes left. I really should ask you what business Keysight Technologies is going to buy next, and you couldn't possibly answer that, but you could tell me whether you see a continuing consolidation on your side of the business between firms offering different technologies to create providers of those universal DevOps solutions, if you like.
Like we're never going to say what we're going to do before we do it, kind of thing. But clearly, we're a large company with, I think we got like $2 billion of cash on the balance sheet. So clearly, we don't have a shortage of cash if we see something that's attractive. But how we view things is in Keysight, there's a particular model. They have what's called the Keysight Leadership Model, KLM. I think it actually came out of the Hewlett-Packard world. And it's very much focused on customers, right? And one of the things I have the pleasure of doing in my job is I run customer advisory boards for the finance sector. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the last time I traveled was actually in London the last week of February. And we did a customer advisory board at the top of the Sky Gardens in Fenchurch Street. And then we fled the country, basically, heading back to the US as the world was closing around behind us. We try and get close. We try and get close to customers, identify what problems they have. And this tends to be in the realms of testing and visibility. That's the general theme. Test, measurement, visibility. And then we look, can we develop it internally? If we can't, then let's have a look at what's available outside. And that's a continuous process that's going on. And I'm involved in multiple things.
Well, it's interesting because there aren't many companies like Keysight which are very broadly test specialists on that scale. Yeah.
And we want to, at the end of the day, what we want to do is provide solutions to our customers. To do that, you don't want to be like individual products. You want to provide a bigger picture about what's going on. So.
Kevin, thank you very much for your time. It's been very interesting. We have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye.